Hello, I'm Thomas Ayer, Chief Content Officer of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-minute live conversations featuring leaders in the performance marketing world speaking about the hottest topics in the industry are scheduled twice monthly. Before we get to today's conversation, a housekeeping note. We'll be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of today's session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Just utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them, and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the episode. Today's episode is the second in our two-episode series titled Supply Chain Shenanigans. After our February 2nd episode covered much of what's happening on the ground for performance and DTC marketers right now, today we'll be taking a look ahead and projecting changes to product business models that can avoid these kinds of stoppages in the future. To discuss, we welcome PDMI Brand Response Council Chair Chris Foster, Vice President of Business Development at Modern Postcard, and Michael Gravier, Professor of Marketing and Global Supply Chain Management at Bryant University. Welcome, gentlemen. Take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Thomas. Michael, we're so thrilled to have you. And for those who've been regular attendees to our PDMI broadcasts, it's true. This is our very first academic. We're so excited to have someone from academia as a guest, because what we know is that there's a lot of so much industry insight and so much fantastic ear to the ground, finger on the pulse knowledge that all of our business folks are providing. But there's also an opportunity, I think, from the academic side to get a broader perspective without the industry bias or the business perspective that sometimes limits the viewpoint. And so we're here with Michael, who's going to teaching professor not only of marketing but of supply chain as well, to kind of talk about some of the broader trends and patterns that we're seeing, and really how we start blending some of this academic perspective with the business acumen to kind of get a clearer picture about what's happening, but most importantly, what we think is going to be happening in the future. So Michael, we're so excited to have you here. We know that prices are rising for container ships. We know that that's going to be a challenge. I'm just going to start off with some questions to kind of see what your perspective is on some of these issues. You had mentioned that, you told me a story before the broadcast about a furniture situation in the UK as reported by the Financial Times that really highlighted some of the challenges, not only of container ship prices, but also the interesting shift or possible shift of trying to go to a domestic supply to offset some of those challenges with international. Could you tell us about that story?
Oh, yeah. So Financial Times, I just saw it this morning. They did a story on the experience with the furniture industry in the UK, and they found that it wasn't so easy to do domestic production when you haven't done it for a while, right? So furniture it's big, right? So it fills a shipping container very quickly. So you need a lot of shipping containers to bring things over, mostly from China, and they were bringing things over from Poland and other places too. So yeah, when your shipping container costs go from $1,000 or $1,500 per container up to $20,000 per container, all of a sudden you start really looking at your supply chains, right? Where are we getting our stuff from? And so they wanted to bring some of that back. They thought they would cut out some of the shipping costs. It turned out not to be so easy. One big issue was just finding labor, skilled labor.
Sure.
How do you add on that much labor for an entire country's furniture industry? You can't do it, not in the short term, right? It takes time to build that up. You got to train people. You got to expand your facilities. I apologize for the dog. You got to expand the facilities. You got to invest in capital, the machinery and stuff to make that happen. And then on top of everything else, you really have to sit back and think about how your products are designed. You're used to specialists in other countries to help you figure that out, or even you just go there and just go to their showroom and you don't even design it yourself. You just take what they have to offer. You see the same thing in clothing. You see the same thing in a lot of consumer goods. That capability, that knowledge, you can't just make it happen in a month or a year or even really a decade. It takes time.
So I guess one question that I would have to follow up on that is a couple of the 3PL guests that we had and the product guests that we had a couple of weeks ago said there could be new opportunities for domestic production for some of these products to get ahead of some of these international issues. Do you actually see a movement towards that? Because the time to ramp up, like you said, and to really adjust and change an entire business model, and kind of even a vertical integration within a business to create and distribute their own products, that might be a challenge. Do you see that happening, or are you kind of hedging your bets a bit?
Oh boy. In the long run, some of that is going to come back.
Okay.
But we need to understand the way we make things. If we want to maintain our standard of living, if we want to maintain the efficiencies we've gotten in the modern economy, it kind of require a global supply chain to a certain degree, right? So I have this exercise I do with my industrial marketing students to make them understand how many relationships industrial marketers have to maintain in a value chain or in a supply chain. And I say, I just have working teams, just do this in a class session. I say, I assign each team a simple product like a light bulb. Well, light bulbs aren't as simple now as they used to be. A bag of potato chips, a book. And I say, start listing everything you need to bring that product into a consumer's hands. And the students, of course, go through the process and they realize for a simple bag of Lay's potato chips, how important it is to manage relationships with a whole bunch of farmers who grow just the right potatoes and use just the right fertilizers and pesticides, the salts, all those inputs, and you quickly get to a couple of hundred companies you need just to guarantee you're going to have, a bag of potato chips on a store shelf. And that's a product that's really simple, and a lot of it is going to be domestic just because of the nature of the product. And then the students' eyes start to open and they start to realize, well, if we want to maintain this deep expertise in high quality, potatoes or chips for phones or electronics for cars, we can't do it with just the domestic market. We need a company that specializes in that component or in that input, so they can have that deep research and development sort of expertise. They can give us the benefit of the economies of scale because they sell to many customers and not just one, so they have a bigger capacity in many cases in aggregate, and we benefit from that as a society. The resource use per person for us to survive has really diminished greatly over the centuries. Now, of course, we're consuming more because we live very affluent lifestyles, but overall, we wouldn't be able to live. I mean, the average person now lives better than kings did, 100 years ago or 150 years ago for sure. Yeah. So we can't entirely get away from that, but I do see the promise of technology to bring back chunks or portions of that production, but it's going to take a little time. I think it's going to be another 10 years before we start to see this happening deeply. And so you're not going to be able to get rid of the importance of having a dedicated computer chip factory.
Sure.
So that means, that could be overseas. It probably will be overseas, although we do have Intel, we do have native capacity to do that. But the housing that goes in, the size of the screen, a lot of these things could be done with additive manufacturing close to home. And you get to pick the size and shape. And you might not be that customized, but I do think a lot of things will be printed closer to home. I think it'll be regionalized.
Interesting. So you touched on a couple, three things that I want to hone in on, I should say. You mentioned the relationships that I can't teach relationships, but you can teach, hopefully, talk about relationship building within your class.
Yep.
You also talked about the technology. So I'm going to touch on those two areas. So with those relationships, do you see that as a new skill set that's needed for the next generation of supply chain managers coming out of school?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So another project I'm working on with a professor out of Baylor and a fellow professor here at Bryant in Rhode Island, we deployed a survey last year asking managers for inputs on what are the most important skills for workers. We want our students to graduate and be able to be the best students they can be, the best entry-level workers they can be. So periodically we go out and we talk to executives, we talk to managers, we deploy surveys, et cetera. And it was very interesting because the survey was deployed last year, sort of at the height of some of the COVID disruption. And we got different results than other studies have gotten in the past. And there's sort of a shift away from this focus on technology and technological tools. There was a shift away from the focus on lean. Not that it went away, but it diminished. Big shift in the technical skills. Of course, you see a focus on inventory. But the big skills, they were always important, but last year it seemed like they were more important than ever. Was problem solving, working with teams, working those relationships with buyers and suppliers.
Right.
And I don't think that's a surprise to anyone out there, because when there's trouble, what do? You knuckle down. You talk to the companies you can trust, they're competent, and you try to develop solutions, and you can't do it by yourself.
Right.
In very few instances.
It's interesting. One of the guests 2 weeks ago talked about that, where it's actually from our business at Modern Postcard. We a direct marketing and direct mail company, so we actually manufacture. We actually have paper, and he had to look around and scramble because paper supplies were getting kind of jittery and pretty weird, and so really leaning into those relationships, was a really important path forward for us, and so. I love that where you mentioned that not only the technical skills and those relationships, but the technology is a piece of this, right? And we know the technology is getting better. We know that there are driverless trucks that are coming up. We know that there are warehouse drones and robots in terms of the management of and the movement of goods. How does that play in with the balance of the skills that some of these new workers have to have?
Wow. So it's tricky when you're teaching these students and that degree they get is supposed to last for years. We have a lot of students who work with local companies. So I've worked with a couple of local companies who have deployed warehouse automation systems. One did sort of a more general automation system for the whole warehouse. Another one looked specifically at drones. And the tricky thing about the future is, just forecasting exactly what you're going to need. I would say the low-hanging fruit, if you really want to benefit from technology, the low-hanging fruit is to have people focus on those systems to give you, first of all, insights into your value network, who's in those networks, to what degree do you depend on them, and go beyond just your immediate supplier, right? Because you can't automate anything if you don't know what you're automating, right? So that's the first thing you need to do, find vulnerabilities. And then, the next thing you need to do is take a look at your parts list and check out and see what's substitutable and put together a database of who else out there can work with you. And then you come up with rules. So a lot of this isn't done in spreadsheets now. It's done in Excel. We don't have systems to make this automatic yet. They're working on artificial intelligence. I'm sure it'll be along someday. But in the short run, students need to learn those basic techniques to, Pareto chart analysis and basic risk analysis and stuff like that. So in the short run, a lot of the technology is just getting that visibility. And visibility over suppliers, visibility over customers. A lot of people don't even have the data, is what I'm trying to tell you.
Sure. So it's not
everyone talks about big data, but you got to have good data, and that's missing.
So that's fascinating, Michael, because it's not just the technology of like a driverless truck or a drone that moves a box to someplace else, but really it's the technology of gaining better visibility of the network of supplies and relationships to help move and connect, and develop contingency plans.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting because we saw the system get stressed. Clearly, the global system got stressed the last couple of years. Increased demand, people were home, labor shortages, prices went up. We all know what that is. And so it's kind of like though that the technology though might not even yet be there. But you had mentioned before that we're constantly living in a time of change and even more accelerated rate of change, and that we kind of lag behind some of the technology that's there. What do you see though as where the technology in a couple of years is going to be ready for us when we catch up to it?
Oh boy. Culture and society always lag technology. That's always been true. Of course, 500 years ago, when you're advancing really slowly, culture has an easier chance to, you get one major innovation every 30 years. Culture can adapt to that more easily than now. We're to the point where, the phone that I use would not be recognizable to me from like 3 years ago. I mean, I'd recognize it, but a lot of the functionality and the apps and stuff, I'd be like, what is this? So that's a much faster timeline. So in the next few years, I think the biggest thing that we need to figure out is how our technology is going to interact with people. So I have talked a few times with one of the big temp agencies out there. I don't know if I'm allowed to say their name or not, but one of the big things they're doing is trying to figure out how to quantify people's skills and match them up to with what they're good at. With also, you got to take into account the kind of the work culture of different organizations. One of the things they found is the people in the companies where the temp workers were going didn't always know how to work well with the temp workers either. So that's something else they had to quantify. So they're just trying to figure out, how do we do this? Do we give people badges? How do we keep their skills sharp? So now you start getting into deploying, constantly updating training programs and stuff to keep up with what's going on out there. I think that is the frontier that nobody has explored yet. And we're not going to be able to manage workers well and have them step in and work with an automated warehouse system when we don't even know what our workers' capabilities are. We don't know what they're good at. Good. Sorry, dogs.
So what about dogs? What about jobs for dogs?
Well, I got a job for these dogs in the backyard here. Oh, there's a dog walking out front. I apologize for that.
So what I think is so interesting is that idea of workers working with an automated warehouse, workers needing to work with automation. One thing that we can just touch on briefly is the driverless trucks, I think, are coming, or planning on coming, and especially some of the bottlenecks at the Canadian border highlights where, gosh, if these are completely automated, does this type of thing happen? And I really like your idea of the future problem to solve is how does technology interact with people? How do you make the two coexist and work together?
Yeah, and that's the real trick. The companies right now, the biggest challenge they have is the workforce. It's the labor, it's the talent. Finding it, categorizing it, training it. If you take a look, there's a huge number of supply chain jobs, and the supply chain jobs are not filled because they can't find workers who have those skills.
Sure.
So you see more and more companies are doing like corporate universities, some of them call it a university, but they're basically training and education programs to make their own sort of educated workforce, provide them the skills that they need. And other companies have done this in the past and been highly successful. Technology multiplies your workforce's capabilities, right? So if you have a workforce capability down here, and you give them fantastic technology and you double it, you're here. But if your workers start out up here and you double it, look how much further you go. And that's how technology works. It multiplies your work. There is some automation that entirely eliminates workers. That is true, but most of it relies on workers to coordinate, communicate with other workers, communicate with other companies. You do have some grunt work. United States is way behind other countries in terms of port automation, for example. A port like Rotterdam processes a container almost twice as fast as an American port does.
Wow.
I mean, when you take a look at the World Bank data and the IHS data, they track port performance, have a port performance index, and the highest ranked U.S. port, I think, is 83 on their list. That's the highest ranked. We don't even break the top 50, right? That's just how far behind our infrastructure has gotten. We still sort of have the 70s and 80s level of technology and workforce processes in a lot of ways, and that needs to change. Now, of course, the workers. Yeah,
it's so interesting. I never would have been known that. I never would have had access to the data that globally our port would rank so poorly in terms of.
Los Angeles ranks somewhere like 230 in the world. So what's our biggest bottleneck in the U.S.? Well, no wonder. And everyone says, oh, we'll just do 24-hour operations at the port. It's not that easy. Most leading ports operate 24/7, but they also have all the infrastructure set up around them to make that happen. In the U.S., most customs offices, most customs offices only work during weekdays. It's hard to get longshoremen to sort of line up your schedules because there's sort of a purposeful sort of labor shortage there to keep salaries up. And I don't blame them. That's their livelihood. Of course, they're going to do what's in their interest. But it does raise a cost for the rest of us. But even if you had them working 24/7, regularly, and they didn't have COVID, that was sort of impacting labor availability too, you still have chassis. And that's the little trailers that you put the containers on to ship around. That chassis problem goes back a long time. It's not new. But we don't update our policies in these areas because voters think it's sexy to build new infrastructure. You tell them you want money for maintenance, and all of a sudden they're looking at their tax bill.
Interesting.
I pay taxes. I get it. I don't want to pay more taxes, but when you stop to think, every dollar we spend to move something in this country is basically a tax. So right now, I think it's around 9% of our nation's GDP goes to just moving things around, and that's really efficient. Yeah. So you go in the grocery store and you pick up a loaf of bread for $1. A loaf of bread doesn't cost $1, but I'm using $1 because it's easy. You pick up a loaf of bread or a stick of gum for $1, and close to a dime of that buck is just moving the ingredients around and getting that product on the shelf.
Yeah, that's
Right now, it's more than $1. That's more than a dime, right?
Yeah, no, it is. And I don't think that that's something that we think about. And within the industry itself, that these new, especially if you get smaller limited release or batch quantity product models, if 50% of all sales are going through Amazon, that means 50% of independent e-tailers and e-commerce stores are trying to manage their own logistics. I think that it's an interesting spot because we don't think about the big, large global trends that we were just discussing. So, Michael, thank you for that insight. Thomas, I'm going to open it up to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Yeah, we have a couple here, a couple of good ones too. First, do you feel, Michael, that today's students, since you're around them so much, tomorrow's workforce is ready to handle the changes needed in the future?
Oh yeah, no doubt. Now, I know sometimes you see in the news people talk about the students, but you know what? When push comes to shove, and they actually are taken out of their homes with their parents who provide maybe too much for them sometimes, and they have to stand on their own, they do what every generation has done. They stand up, right? And in many ways, they have tools that we never had. So it's amazing to watch them. I'll throw a problem at students, a project to do in class, and they're reaching out to their network of friends to find information. They're not just going to Google, right? And I'm like, well, no wonder they're able to get stuff done because they're learning this skill to pull together teams of people, pool their knowledge, and answer problems in ways that I never did. And let's be honest, do you really want students who are just good at sitting down and answering multiple choice tests or doing a little math on a piece of paper when they go out there in the real world? I mean, technical skills matter, but what are they supporting? I think the problems of the future are more complex than that. I think the social skills, interconnectivity that modern students naturally have, I think it's the right generation coming up at the right time is what I think. So.
Awesome.
Great.
That's optimistic. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
That is positive. And one more. We'll wedge in one more here with looking at the clock. What do you believe could be the single biggest short-term and single biggest long-term adjustment to the U.S. supply chain that would improve commerce?
Hey, that's two questions.
Yeah.
Short term, yeah. So I was listening to John Portari yesterday, who used to be a deputy secretary of transportation, and now he's on the supply chain disruption task force for the White House. And he was talking yesterday, and I think he nailed it. Of course, he has experience in this area. He said the level of demand we're seeing now, they are the floor. They're not the ceiling, right? This is the new reality for tomorrow from now on, right? So all these technologies that everyone's been talking about, and we haven't quite seen them yet because there's always a delay for them to be implemented. They're going to push a huge growth in economic prosperity. And it's not just technology. We have huge middle classes coming up across the globe. And that creates wealth that was unheard of when we had just Western countries who were affluent, or mostly Western countries, right? So I think long term, we need to prepare for the fact that this is the new reality. It is going to be competition for resources, true, but it's also going to be competition for markets and what markets provide. And I think American companies are extremely well positioned for that. We have excellent brands. We're very much in touch with consumers. We're very good at adapting, et cetera. So that's the long-term answer. This is the floor, not the ceiling. This is the new reality, right? And we'll have little dips. It won't just keep going up straight from now on. I think we'll have little relief over the next year or two, but over the long haul, it's going to keep going up, right? So short term, you have to fix the labor issue. You have to fix your relations with labor. And you've probably seen it in the news a lot. A lot of workers aren't happy with how they're being treated. There's a class of workers who's done very well in this day and age, salary wise, and the way they're treated. And there's a class of workers sort of been left behind, and through a variety of factors, they're flexing their muscle a little bit, but yeah, they're bringing value. So here's the trick. We can't keep treating these workers like they don't contribute value. If they want to step up to the table and get a bigger piece of the pie, I think the companies who succeed are the ones who realize the workers are the ones who are executing their vision. Educate them, give them the tools, make them more able to execute that vision. They're more likely to believe in your company and see opportunities there in that way. And you're giving them value. People tend to reciprocate with gratitude. Some of them might move on, but you're more likely to be able to replace them with people who are attracted to what you're doing as well, right? So it's not an easy problem to deal with, but I think if you don't get in front of this problem, everything else you do is just going to fall behind.
That's great advice.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, hey, thank you both. Thank you to Michael's dog as well. We appreciate his insights.
Sorry, I don't usually do this, I swear.
Our most common question is, let's see the dog. But no, we appreciate all of it. We appreciate the insights. Good stuff. You're out there in our viewer world. Your next opportunity to attend a live online Take 20 episode is Wednesday, March 2nd. As Chris and I will discuss what you can expect when you visit with us at PDMI East in Miami Beach, March 13th through 15th. From crucial education sessions to tremendous networking, you won't want to miss it. Please visit the pdmi.com/take-20 to register for the webinar, and visit the pdmi.com/pdmi-east to register for the event. Time is of the essence, as guest rooms at our host hotel, Eden Rock, Miami Beach, at the rate of $329 per night, are moving quickly. This rate will only be available through next Monday, February 24th, or until our inventory sells out, whichever comes first. So book your badge to get your room today and join us in Miami. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you again for checking out this episode of the PDMI's Take 20. Be safe, be well. We'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.